When Simone de Beauvoir famously wrote in 1949, "One is not born woman, one becomes woman," she was not advancing a transgenderist argument. She was critiquing the fact that the number of X chromosomes in our DNA, pace Peter, is used in our societies as a pretext to make women the second sex and dictate gendered roles and behaviours. Feminists of the so-called second wave thought to subvert these binary gender norms and reframe the experience of being woman as not so much about us being different from men, but as different from what men think we are. A person who identifies as transgender retains her or his birth DNA. No amount of surgery, no amount of synthetic hormone dosage, no change of clothing will alter this fact. Recognizing this is not essentialism. What is essentialist is the presumption that people sexed in a certain way have a corresponding gender hardwiring, and that for transgender people the wires have somehow become crossed, meaning that the external appearance of the body has to be altered to correspond to the correct mental wiring. Well, there's no such thing as a male brain or a female brain or intersex brain. Brains are brains. Brains don't have gender, any more for that matter than bodies do. Gender and sex are not the same thing. Sex is biological, gender is ideological. Medical attempts to make our sexed bodies fit prescriptive gender ideology are not new. As the story of Lily Elbe, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, the biopic, The Danish Girl, that story reminds us of this. There is in a particular an appalling history of medicalization of children deemed to have some sort of abnormality, especially when they do not conform to prescriptive gender stereotypes. And I'm going to tell you a little story about one of those, being a tall girl. In the state of Victoria, between 1959 and 1975, 168 tall girls were prescribed the drug diethylstilbestrol, or DES, a synthetic hormone. The drug was given to make the girls age faster and thus stop growing too tall. The carcinogenic properties of DES had been proven 4 years before the treatment was stopped. DES has not been used since that time, but the practice of prescribing hormones, usually now estrogen, to girls to stop them growing taller than what is considered normal has continued, and continued for some decades at least in many parts of the world. If it's stopped, it's only very recently. Studies on this practice have shown 3 things. First, high doses of synthetic hormones at an early age have negative health consequences later in life. Second, there is no medical evidence that being tall is harmful to girls. The reason for prescribing treatment is purely ideological. Third, the rate of parental and child consent is significantly higher when doctors advocate the treatment and lower when doctors present a more neutral view. Unsurprisingly, none of this is surprising. Now we have a new ideological justification for meddling with children's development. Some sections of society, and I'm firmly convinced the pharmaco-medical machine, have invented the transgender child. I don't buy the gender dysphoria argument. Let us not forget that until 1990, homosexuality was also considered a mental illness. Such illnesses are ideological constructions to fit the political needs of the moment. Statistics on the trauma of adolescents going through an unwanted puberty and on depression and suicide rates are routinely cited as arguments in favour of transgendering children. But guess what? Adolescence is traumatic for everyone. And risks of self-harm are greater at that time for everyone. The statistics on girls self-harming during adolescence are appalling. Growing up brings its share of joys and discoveries. It's confronting and awkward and messy for everyone. But we do in the end have to grow up. Girls who have felt suicidal, who have histories of eating disorders and self-harm, who have felt our bodies were all wrong, and who have suffered from conservative and abusive family or school environments and have come out the other side, or are perhaps still working on coming out the other side, we all know that the problem is not our bodies or our brains. The problem is not us. The problem is society. The problem is gender. Feminists should not be shamed or censored for talking about our both intimate and social and indeed political experience of our female embodiment. Some male to female transgender activists get upset about feminists banging on so much about women's sexual health and reproductive rights because it excludes them. Julia Serrano, who's a very well-known transgender activist, has written on this, among many others. When we try to organise around women's specific experience or create spaces in which we XXs of the world may talk freely and feel physically and psychologically safe, we are pejoratively branded TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminist. This is extremely damaging. Last year, let me give you an example, some female students in Auckland, you may have heard about this, as part of a women's festival organised a cupcake day, with the cupcakes shaped and decorated to resemble women's vulvas. The intent was to encourage women to feel comfortable with their bodies and to combat the idea that women's genitalia are all supposed to fit some prescribed shape and size. A number of male to female transgender people vociferously protested that the cupcake event created an unsafe environment for them and tried to have it shut down. The organisers pointed out that every other event during the festival catered to transgender people. The cupcake event was the only one that focused specifically on women's experience. Some male to female transgender protesters even said the event was killing them. Now, one really wonders how cupcakes can kill people. Perhaps if you lace them with arsenic, I don't know. But it does get more ridiculous. Lesbians are now criticised for imposing a cotton ceiling on male to female transgender people who wish to have sex with us. As a gay male activist blogged, if there was suddenly a swarm of F2M transgender, female to male transgender people, insisting they were gay men and that male-embodied homosexuals should have sex with them, would these homosexuals be expected to accept this as docilely? As the blogger put it, the gender expression of transgender people means nothing to us. We are homosexuals, not homogenderals. But of course no such swarm exists, because the overwhelming majority, statistically speaking, of female to males previously identified as lesbians from all the research I've been able to do on the topic. There are simply not large numbers of heterosexual women, that is, attracted to men, deciding they want to become men. There are, however, large numbers of male to female transgender people who now claim to be lesbians, which makes them exactly what prior to reassignment? These sorts of absurd polemics are happening because there has been a semantic slippage between sex and gender. Women continue, including in Australia, to suffer various forms of ostracism, humiliation, discrimination and violence simply because we are female, whether or not we conform to gender norms, which does not deny for a minute that people who identify as transgender, intersex, and I think intersex and transgender are separate problems, does not deny the violence experienced by transgender people, not for 1 second. But let's not deny the violence experienced by women. When we protest, we are disbelieved, ridiculed, punished, or simply ignored. Or we are framed as nasty viragos attacking men who are now, poor dears, experiencing a crisis of masculinity, and it's all our fault. The ideology of transgender male-sexed people is providing male-sexed people with new ways of exercising socially, culturally, and ideologically their sense of entitlement over women, their presumed right to dictate what a woman is, how women should think, and how we should behave. Fortunately, however, a number of brave male to female transgender people, and I like to close on an optimistic note, many of whom refute the label transgender, preferring transsexual, for example, have gone on the record as gender critical and are speaking out against these forms of transgender ideology and the concomitant bullying and misogyny exercised against feminists in its name. These gender critical transsexuals and transgender people have created websites such as Gender Apostates and various blogs, but some of them have themselves reported being bullied by transgender people for daring to critique the doxer. I remain, however, cautiously optimistic. This debate is happening, for one thing, and I am encouraged by the stance of some transgender or transsexual people and some gay men as well, and of course many women, who problematize the ideological conflation of sex and gender. It allows some modest room for hope that we can engage in sensible conversations about how we may collectively find legal, political, social, and cultural solutions to the problem of gender which oppresses us all, without those solutions being at the expense of women, women embodied female, or resulting in the effective erasure of lesbians. Thank you.